The principal Preeti ma'am, the presence of Jaishankar sir is just a very pleasant surprise, and I would like to thank the HOD, Manu, and all my colleagues. We know each other so well, and it is Manu who is actually behind forcing me to come and give a talk on Absurd. So I thank him for that small pressures that he gave throughout for such a talk. And without much delay, we shall begin with a question. Whether it is relevant or not, that is the most important thing. We are in 21st century and we are talking of absurd. That was in current, that was a term that was used much earlier. But are we in this particular age where we face this problem of absurd is a question. And I would like to begin with an incident that has happened when a philosophy student was asked, what is the difference that philosophy made in you? So that particular student said that, what is the proof of existence? We all exist. But I see all these things as beings, not as mere objects. They exist in my consciousness. And just because they exist in my consciousness, it is not a proof that they exist. But there is a difference of seeing things as a being and just not taking care of all these things around us. So many things are there, existing all around us. We too exist in a particular time and space. But more than that, when it comes to human beings, we are beings who can think of us. In our consciousness, we can make ourselves as an object or a subject, whatever it be. We can think of ourselves. So these objects, they can't think of themselves as an object in their consciousness. So that makes the whole difference. So existing is something very important for these philosophers because they are speaking of the anxieties, the kind of doubts, the kind of problems that it creates when you become aware of. So when you're sleeping, you're not aware of your existence. Then there is no dread. So when you're shaken out of your whole being, when you're shaken out of your comfort zones, then comes the existentialist angst. You can consciously do it sometimes. Sometimes the circumstances may force you to do it. So that is what is our concern in this particular topic, because Camu is one of my favorite writers and I find meaning in him. It communicates. So that is a particular existentialist question that may come. So we were under the grip of pandemic and the particular dread that we are facing, whether we'll exist or not, will survive or not. So this becomes meaningful when death comes, war comes, pandemic comes, or even without that, you can ask this particular question to yourself. Am I existing in an authentic way? Or I am existing for just the sake of existing? So these are not some areas which is confined to philosophers alone. We can ask this question. Sometimes we may get an answer, sometimes we may not get an answer, but still it is meaningful to ask this. So we'll just go into a bit of what existentialism is. So we have already seen Kierkegaard and anxiety. He is one of the fathers. He's called the father of existentialism. We just go in brief. We'll touch upon some of the concepts of existentialism in general, and then we'll come to Camus. Stranger and outsider, in-depth analysis we'll do. Then we'll just touch upon his play because it is very much meaningful because we have just survived the pandemic. So it's a philosophical movement which happened in 19th and 20th century Europe, And what was the reason? There was a particular existentialist moment that was there, because the whole world was facing a dreadful war, Second World War. Rise of Nazis was something which was threatening, and there are the coming of the atomic bombs. So all these dread would naturally put any thinking man into the question of existence, not only philosophers, anyone. So when you're facing something like that, imagine ourselves being seated in a territory where we can be bombed at any time. So at that time, we may think on this, we may ponder on this in a very serious manner. So an entire generation was facing these questions, and these questions were related to death, freedom, meaninglessness. So all this brought in something called, it expanded, it made sense, people could relate to it, and it found expressions in philosophers, writers, so many of them, and that is what we call as existentialism. So it was, when you look at the term, it was coined by Gabriel Marcel in 1940. That is just something immaterial, but still, for the sake of looking at history, we are looking at how it was formed. So these are some of the slides that you will come across when you search for existentialism. These kinds of things just come into your consciousness. Absurdity, how is it different from nihilism, and you're given so many free choices. What is that you choose? And lack of meaning in life. So you may find that I don't have any problem of meaninglessness. My life is meaningful. That's absolutely fine. But it is good to shake you out of your comfort zones and to think whether what these people are saying is true or not. Your religion may give you an identity, your political ideology may give you an identity, your nationality may give you an identity, your gender may give you an identity, but still, what is beyond that? What is the essence of things? What does it mean to exist? What is to be an authentic life? These are some deeper questions that any human being, any thinking human being can ask, even in this digitally connected 21st century. We have 1,000 friends in the Facebook. Have we got one in real life? That is the question. Whether you are showing your happiness or you are having real happiness. You can show happiness by posting a photo, you can show happiness. But whether you are having it really, whether you'll post a photograph of yourself crying, you may be crying inside, you may not show it to the world. So that is inauthentic existence, I would call. Maybe people will find meaning in that. It's easy following crowd, and it's difficult to stand alone. So that is the most dreadful thing to do. You'll be standing on the verge of a precipice. It's like such an experience. Standing against the crowd, going against norms. You find that in Camu's Outsider. So we just go quick glance into what are the principles of existentialism. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. So I, as an individual, I may be existing in a particular time, space, and what I make of myself is the most important thing. What the society makes of me is the second thing. So the choice is something very important for the existentialists. And the key terms, this is just a quick glance because we don't have much time. And there was a philosophy in Greek where essence was very important. Essentialism, it was called. And what is essentialism? So what makes a thing a thing? What makes a dagger? That is a common example that is used. What makes a dagger a dagger? What makes a dagger a dagger? It has got a handle, it has got a blade. And I've got only handle. Will it be a dagger? No, the blade makes a dagger a dagger. So that is the essence of that dagger. And we existentialists would say that that is not what it is. First it should be there. it should exist, then comes the essence of things. So for a human being, the essence, we have got an essence, and that is what we are. That was the belief that they had. And over the centuries, existentialists would replace it and say that the first fact is we are. There are many moments like epiphanies that you can find in many of the works of existential, where they realize that when they are sitting in parks, when they are sitting in some sea, like that we find in James Joyce, epiphanies, sudden realization that this is not a fit of imagination, this is not my dream. I exist at this particular. So that is something which is very important for them, for all these philosophers, all these people who deal with these things. So existence comes first, and then comes our choice of what we make of ourselves, the meaning that we give to life, all that. And another important concept that is associated with existentialism is freedom and choice. So the first thing that came, we exist, essence comes after that, and we have a lot of choice. There are roads which are not taken. And what is the choice that you do? With that choice, with that freedom, there are multiple options that is there before you. So there is Sartre brings in a question of a waiter. He wants to not to be a waiter, and he thinks of so many possibilities of not becoming a waiter. And then he decides that it's a bothersome job, going and finding another job. So I'll continue to be a waiter. There he has got a choice, but he never takes that choice. He continues with that. So the choices that you take in life sometimes defines you. So that inherent freedom. So society is making me do this, family is making me do that, is being led by an inauthentic existence. So don't go and rebel with your family. Don't go in rebellion with the society, because we are discussing this. We are discussing this from the point of view of these philosophers, just to understand that. Just to get to know what it is like to exist, and not to meddle with our ordinary life that is maybe perfectly meaningful at the moment. So individual creates his own values, his own system, that is another thing. And another term that authenticity and individuality. Individuality is so important. Each one is different. Each one is unique. The uniqueness of an individual is something which they give much. So that rejects conformity. So there you have problems with existentialists. When you don't conform to societal norms, when you just go against whatever system you are brought up in, your religious upbringing, your cultural definitions, everything becomes a problem when you take a choice. So along with this existentialist choice, there comes dread, anxiety, and the problem that you'll have to. So if you make a decision to become like that, along with that, like paraphernalia, there will follow so many things that you may not like, that you'll have to face. Otherwise, there is no existential question, there is no radicalism, there is no challenge. So anxiety and despair, that is part and parcel of these choices to lead an authentic life. So you may argue, for arguing, you can argue that it's perfect. It makes sense to me. My life is meaningful, as I may have a particular religious ideology that is making sense. But for them, in order to lead a life that is authentic, they will have to face this challenge of existentialist angst that comes from the realization that the whole world is indifferent to you. You are suffering, you are crying, but what is happening to the world? It goes on as it is, no change. So the so-called, so that there is what nihilism springs from. There is where you have atheism springing from. So it is at least good to ask these questions, so that we are not blindly following ideologies. So I've seen many Christians carrying Bible with them every day, but not following even one of the principles. doing all that is to be done for the sake of doing. So everything, I can speak religion is something which is very, very difficult to talk of these days, because no one likes questioning religion, but at least you can question your ideology, what you are following, whether it is authentic. You preach, you do so many things, you follow dogmas, is it what is expected of us as real human beings? So that angst springs from these issues that you ask, deeper questions that you ask yourself. And they also deal with the concept of death, mortality, and then finally comes the awareness of death is something which is, when you're born, so Greeks would say, once you're born, the best thing is to die. So that is a very, very, very narrow way of seeing things maybe. You may feel that, but that is an inevitability. That is a reality that we'll have to face. So this is also something very important for existentialists. And then comes the concept of absurd. That is, the whole world, as we already discussed, the whole world is indifferent. So we rationalize things. We are trying to make sense of things. We know our problem, and when you look at the world, it goes on. So the approach that we have of the world is very difficult. And I sometimes tell my students, we imagine God to be like us. We want God to take revenge. We want God to punish those who sin against us. We want God to punish. Why is he sitting like that? He is not acting. I am praying so much. So that kind of things don't work. And you realize that your concept of God is so narrow. You will have to think in broad terms to understand what God is. It has got its own rationale. It doesn't meddle with your small, narrow world. And then you realize that it is not easy to confine to these norms, because the world as such may be indifferent to you. So that brings a lot of anxiety, lot of problem, lot of dread for the existentialist. And this is what is one of the concerns of Albert Camus. He deals with this issue of absurd in his novels. When you look at existentialists, you find these people, Kierkegaard, we already discussed that. Then Dostoevsky is there, Nietzsche is there. And this is just in a nutshell what they said. He's a father of existentialism, and he gave importance to the subjectivity. He said that he was a Danish philosopher. He was not happy with the way the Danish church was executing things. And he said that what we need is a leap of faith towards Christianity. Something other than Christianity, something which is beyond Christianity. Not that the kind of the dogmatized Christianity that he was seeing all around him. So many paradoxes. They all found problems with religion, and some became atheists, some became theists. So there is a divergence that you can find in existentialists, like some turning to God, some turning away from God. So that is response that we can have. When something comes to us, we can have diverse response. So these are some of the diverse responses that these people had. Then you have Nietzsche. He introduced the concept of will to power. Then we came to Martin Heidegger. He introduced the concept of being. Being is not a very simple term, but still it has got much more meaning in existentialist concept. And he introduced the idea of thrownness. This is something which is interesting. The idea of thrownness. We are thrown into the world at a particular moment, in a particular family, in a particular time history, and all these are our realities. And what we do with this. So these are some of the questions that it is not easy for us to go and read all this, because it's all very dry. It is not very, we can start with, if you are interested, you can start with some minor introductions, then you can go into, and it will give new insights into your existence, It will throw much light on how we existed till this moment and what makes a difference. You will see the world in sometimes new perspectives. So this is one of his very famous book, Being and Time. And we get lost in finite things. Sometimes we live a complete lie. We lie for the society. We lie what we are, only we know. So that kind of problem, living an authentic life, even if we are not conforming to the society, stand against it and fight for your being. That is a challenge not easy to do. That is something which all the characters that you find in existentialism, they do that. In the novels, they challenge the societal norms, they question the theological ideas, and they stand against the society. What happens to them? They are condemned sometimes. They are put to death. So you can't question things. You can't go against the crowd. It is not easy. So it is that realization that we are not leading authentic life. Inauthenticity is something that they discuss in detail. Then we come to Sartre. I am not touching upon every existentialist, just briefly a few of them. And Sartre brings in the idea of existence precedes essence. That is one of the key tenets of existentialism, that we exist in a particular moment, at a particular time. It is not a fits of imagination. We are there, really. And that is not like seeing things. That is something like realizing. Very strong sense of being is something like realizing. It is as spoken by one poet. It's like ale or alum. It's very scent. You have very strong perfumes. And when that is there, that makes its presence in a room. Like that, suddenly when you realize that it is not your imagination, in your consciousness, you as a being is there. That makes a whole lot of difference, and that is what I think they have. So I think only that I can say. I'm a small student of philosophy, maybe trying to grapple with things, trying to understand things. We can't know everything. We're just trying to discuss things, not bringing in statements and saying that this is what it is. We are standing on the shores of time, and we are just exploring together what it is to be. This vast ocean that we are seeing, these ideas that we are grappling with. So Sartre, he has got a very important work, Being and Nothingness. That concept is good, title is good, but reading may not be so easy, but still it's a very seminal work. Then we come to our topic. So this was a bit of a digression. We come to Camu. And he, as we already discussed, he speaks of absurdity of human existence, meaninglessness of life, and what is the purpose of meaning. So he has his own answers to these questions, and his answers may not be ours. We may have different answers to these questions, and we are looking at what was his response to the kind of meaninglessness that comes, suffering. Why there is suffering in this world? We can't give an easy answer to that particular question. It's something you still see. Lots of people suffer. And when you look at his biography, he was a French novelist, essayist, and playwright. He won Nobel Prize in 1957 for his works, which illuminates the problems of human consciousness in our times, their times. People could relate to him. People, when they read him, it made perfect sense. They could understand who Marsault was. They could understand who Dr. Rieu was, because that was the dread that they were feeling. That was the anxiety that the whole generation was feeling. I once read somewhere that Waiting for Godot was being staged in prison. So the prison authorities were worried about whether this play would make any sense to the prisoners. Because it's an absurd play. Nothing happens in the play. Two trams are there. They are walking. They are just discussing. Nobody comes. Nothing happens. They are endlessly waiting for somebody who wouldn't turn up. And to their surprise, they found that they were actually enjoying the play. It made perfect sense to them. So when you are able to relate to something that you are feeling, then you are able to understand that. So we in 21st century who are more connected, who have various selves, I would say. We have a actual self that is sitting here, and we have a digitalized self, isn't it? We have a digitalized self. So somebody who wants to know more about me may search my Facebook and find a self which may be a false self, which may not be my real self. So I can create a false self of myself through the digital space. Sometimes that person may not even exist. It can be a fake address that is created. So that makes sense. That is how you can relate existence to. That is where absurdity, isn't it that absurd? We have so much of communication we have grown in, and if you want to talk to your colleague, you just WhatsApp her. She'll be just sitting close to you, maybe sitting in another room. And we are doing this. Isn't it absurd? So that is where you shake yourself out of your comfort zones. Otherwise, what will happen to us? Like Harari would say, we'll become homo deus. We'll end to be homo sapiens. We will become another race. We will be so digitalized that we can change our own perception of things. So that is something that future generation, but we should think of them. We should think in ahead so that we get out of these dangers. We at least make a child aware of that. Existence is the most important thing than the small device that you're carrying along with you all the time, without which you can't sleep. So he's a philosopher. Is he a philosopher? That is a question that is asked him. And he says that I'm not a philosopher. I'm not an atheist, he says, but I don't believe in God. So how can you have two faces like that? He says that I'm not an atheist, but I don't believe in God. So we categorize people. If they don't believe in God, if I don't follow this, if I don't go to Sunday Mass, you're not a Christian. How can dogmas define you? So these kinds of challenges are often brought in by these philosophers, and this is something which is the core of existentialist angst, absurdity, and all that. So these are his major works: The Stranger, The Plague, The Fall, Myth of Sisyphus, Caligula. You can read all this, but my favorites would be The Stranger, that is my favorite work. Then Plague also I like, Myth of Sisyphus, which is an interesting essay, we would say. And the themes that he deals with is the alienation. Alienation, so many people have dealt with it. You have Wasteland in T.S. Eliot is dealing with alienation. You can find so many writers. You have so many. You can list out so many who is dealing with. And the inadequacies of traditional values. That is very important for these philosophers, especially for Camus, because he finds it inadequate. What is the solution? Sometimes there is no solution to your problem. Nobody can give you a solution because you rationalize things and you want a solution, and the world is going on its own. It has got its own rules. So you may not get a solution like that. So that may end your life in absurdity. You may not get an answer. So the irrationality of universe on one side, the rational animal that you are, and both will come to a conflict at times. And what to do? Camus has his own solution. Sometimes we may not get. So we are not here to hunt for solutions. We are just discussing, we are trying to grapple with a problem which is of which is great importance, which sometimes can open new paths, sometimes throw insights into your own existence. So suicide, decay, death, human revolt, exile, redemption, these are very important concepts that comes into his writings. And we'll have just a brief discussion of what this myth of Sisyphus is. It's a critical philosophical essay because this forms the basis of his works. This is the philosophy from which he developed his concept of absurd. This is from which he molds the character Mersault that you will find in Stranger, and another translation of it is outsider, who is an outsider to the society because he doesn't conform to a good stone, a boulder, a big stone up a mountain, and when he reaches there, again the boulder will roll back, and again he will have to take it to the heights. And you have a parallel in Narayana Dubrandan, where you have he laughing at when it falls down, he laughs at because he knows the futility of it. So are we not rolling boulders? From morning to evening, are we rolling boulders? So that is the problem, that we do so many things. We look at WhatsApp, we go to class, Parati, we cook, we do so many things. Are we not rolling boulders like Sisyphus? So that is where it strikes you. That is where you are able to relate to it. That is where it makes sense. So something you read and you don't make sense, you don't think about it because it challenges you, because it asks from you non-conformity, and you may lack courage to do that. We all may lack, because so many things that we do is because of this fear. So he is rolling up, but for Camu, Sisyphus is different. Why? Because he knows the futility of that. He knows that this boulder will roll back, and this is a meaningless act. So we may be rolling boulders like Sisyphus, not knowing the absurdity, and knowing the absurdity and rolling the boulders is something which is different in Camu. There he concludes the essay by saying that the indifference of the universe is something which is very striking in him, and it can lead to nihilism in him. And finally, I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. This is how, we don't have time to go in depth into the essay. You can read it if it interests you. Foot of the mountain, one always finds one's burden again. The burden is lying down. That boulder has come down. That burden that we roll. So we can ask ourselves, are we rolling boulders? Is it what we are doing with our lives? So that brings you to not a very simple question, that brings you to the existentialist question, that is a very deeper level of existence, that is very meaningful. I find it very meaningful, asking such. Otherwise it is numbness. Otherwise you don't question, you go here. It is not to bring about any kind of revolution. It is not to change the society. I believe no one can change. What you can change is your perspective. You can't change another person. It's not easy to do. So the struggle itself towards the height is enough to fill a man's heart. So Sisyphus, he says, is happy. Why? Why is Sisyphus happy? Because he knows that this is a futile act. Still you are doing. So that is where Camus finds meaning in Sisyphus. So there are various reasons how absurdity arises, the irrationality that you find in the indifference of you. You look at the universe, you look at the world. Because we are here, the rain never stopped. Because we are going to have a discussion, because we are having a lecture, then rain never stopped. It went on. Because it is causing flood, it never stopped. So that is what you find. You cannot bring it to our rationality. It is important for you, but it is not. It has got its own rules. So universe which is fundamentally indifferent to human desires and aspirations, and the conflict that you find, that leads to all these questions. The anxiety, existentialist angst, and all those technical terms that we use. We can use simpler terms. Suffering. Why do I suffer? You needn't ask like existentialist and why there is suffering in this world. You can ask a very simple question. And what is it that gives meaning to my life? So that is not easy to answer. As being a woman is what? Being a mother, being a wife, being a teacher, following my passions. Is that what brings meaning to my life? That is a very important question that you can ask. Even if you are in 18th century, even if you are 21st century, even if the younger generation should be prompted to ask these. Because they are so digitalized that they may not find happiness in small things. There is a poem by Hopkins where he says, Margaret is crying. Margaret is crying because the leaves are falling. So when it comes to a particular season, the spring season, when the autumn season, when these leaves will fall down. So, and she's crying because leaves are falling, and the poet says, don't cry over these things, because life is such that you will come to such things colder. So many things will happen in your life that would make you not mourn over these small things. So there are greater things in life, and that must have made. So there are three responses to this existentialist angst that Camu would suggest. And one is not a very good one. He would say is the question of suicide. Everyone once in life at least must have encountered this particular question. Or if you haven't encountered, it's fine. It perfectly makes sense. But if you faced it, it's a very deep question, he says, because it's a philosophical question. It's a threat to your very existence, whether to end it or not. So you may be living a very meaningful life, so you needn't think about these things. But for him, it was a question, it's a philosophical question, may not be for us. So don't relate it to everything that you find. Camus' solution may not be your solution, but we are trying to understand what he is trying to tell us. Then religion and philosophy. So this is a problem that we have. When you try to go away from, society won't leave you. She's non-religious. And that is also said as finding yourself in a philosophical system, finding meaning in religion, and all that may be sometimes a kind of philosophical suicide. Camus says it's just escaping from certain questions that you don't want to face. And then the final thing will be, you will become rebellious. Sometimes you'll accept the fate, sometimes you will become rebellious. So when you face this anxiety, when you face this dread, when you face the indifference of the universe, you can have these diverse responses, these kinds of responses to, as he suggests in his philosophical explorations, he would suggest all these things. And then I'm skipping a few slides and we come to, because this is something that would interest us. And you have, for this particular work, you have got two translations. One is Stranger, the other is Outsider. This is a hugely popular work of Camus, which was published in 19... Oh no. So death in the form of a reality has gripped him. And whose death? Death of his mother. And what is his response? I don't know whether she died yesterday, maybe. But where is she? She is in an old age home. And he takes, so it's obligate, showing happiness. There is a lot of difference between all that. So that is one of the important things that happens. He's indifferent. He fails to conform to the norms of the society. Earlier slides. Next. So he is a shipping clerk who lives in 1940s. He's a very young, ordinary man, not a hero. What do you expect of a hero? Hero is to do things, something which is, he has to save people, he has to rescue people, he has to act out in bold ways in which society expects him. So when you come to modern literature, you don't see heroes. We see anti-heroes. Sometimes we see our own replica of things. Ordinary people who respond in a way which is how you would respond to, but still you have this masks that you create for the society. And he fails to do that. His mother was living in an old age home in a country. He takes time off and attends her funeral. And he is narrating his own story. He's a first person narrator. And he tells us what he sees there. There are so many inmates who are grieving, who are mourning, who were emotionally attached to his mother. But he is not. So how would the society judge him for that? That is the most important question. If you don't conform to norms, what will happen? And he is a person, because he is following a philosophy which is very radically different from what would make sense, because they were all facing much challenge at that time. They would do such things. They would challenge the society. And what happens at the funeral? When everybody is drinking, so we also discussed about coffee, he drinks regular white coffee rather than obligatory black coffee. They have a norm of drinking black coffee there, where it's funeral of a person. You have to conform to these. He smokes. That is not expected during a funeral. You'll have to show the society that you're sad. But unfortunately, he's not an ideal hero. You needn't imitate him. But we are just analyzing what happens when you stand against things. When we shouldn't follow what everyone is doing. There may be one or two who are doing things in a different why they are doing. At least you can ask such questions. So vigil that is held, and when someone asks whether he wants to see his mother, wants to kiss her, he declines. And what happens to his life after that? His life. You are moved. If you don't show the society, if you don't put on masks, what will happen to? You will have to face the judgment that they are going to give us. And sometimes you are considered as a person who we should be very careful of. Because we want conformity, we don't want rebellion, we don't want someone who would act in a different way that society expects. So I'm not justifying Marsault here. We are trying to understand what goes through his mind. And from an existentialist point of view, what are the things that Camu is trying to tell us? So in his beach vacation he goes with, and he develops some problems with two Arab people, and suddenly in a flash of a moment he kills one of them. He shoots one of the persons, and that too is not very eventful. And when the jury questions him why you killed that man, he says that it is because of the sun. The sun was very hot. So I killed him because of... So there too you find indifference. Camu, in one of his afterwords, he has written, he's an antichrist. He is all that he would desire not to be, not a good person. He is a very dreadful person. He is a threat to the society. So he is to be annihilated. He is to be put to death. So when the jury is trying to and there are incidents of chaplain coming to prison, trying to turn him to religion. They have a quarrel. And at any of these moments, we don't find him regretting. We don't find him questioning things. We don't find him, just because he acts in a different way, there should be a problem with him. Nothing of that sort is going on with him. So before. Yes. So jury deems his personality not crime as punishable by death. So that is our question. He has done a crime. For that he should get his punishment. But he is not getting punishment for that. Why is he punished? Because he doesn't conform to the societal norms. So the non-conformity brings in a kind of threat to the society, and that is why he is punished. So that is a problem, and trial scenes that is going on, and lack of emotion that he shows. And many people, witnesses come, they tell him his mother's funeral he was acting indifferent. He was not a mourner. He was not having any kind of behavior that one would see in a person. So these scenes, when it comes to us, we should imagine what we are doing there. Are we showing sadness, or do we really have? Is the society really worried about you? These are some of the deeper questions that Marsault would prompt us to ask before deeming him to be a criminal, before saying that he is just a bad person. We can also analyze our own response to these issues of death and societal conformity. So he's facing death, and finally it is sure, he's sure that he'll be executed. And how he approaches this particular moment in his life. So this particular moment he takes as it comes. So he imagines that there will be so many people who will be coming to see me die. That doesn't matter. I'm not going to turn myself to something like a structure and make sense. I'll face as it is. People will come, they'll see my execution, then I'm gone. That is how he takes it to be. So the final assertion is that a large hateful crowd, that is something. So he knows that people will hate him. Knowing and facing is different. Knowing that you are not liked, you are seen as something like very awful, like you find in Kafka's Metamorphosis. One fine morning a man finds that he is turned into a cockroach or an insect, whatever it is, and people have fear of him. And this sort of meaning in the absurdity that you find in Camu. So all these issues, freedom, choice, confrontation with absurd, all these things are explored in the novel. You find in different universe, and we cannot find the fault with systems sometimes. It is because of the system that we are like this. So it is ultimately your choice. If you want to believe in particular religious ideology, you should choose this because you are convinced. You shouldn't believe it because your parents forced, your teachers forced you, or the society forced you. And there are people who blame others for their predicament. So that is lack of confidence in one's choice, I would say. So at some moment in your life, at least you should take that choice, not to become like Marsault, not to be condemned to death like Marsault, but to lead a very authentic life. So that is the detachment, all this, we are all alone, we'll have to make a choice. People may not understand what you are going through, and all that choices daily you'll have to take, not 1 or 2 days, maybe an entire life, the life that is of choices. So that is something, desires, your impulses, what you do with those. That is yet another deeper question that we don't have time to discuss. Then finally, isolation and condemnation of the society that we'll have to face. This is what I am feeling now. If I be very genuine and tell you what I feel, what kind of a person she is, you may judge me. So because of that fear, I may not tell you what I feel. So isn't that inauthentic? Isn't that absurd? That is where Camu relates to. That is where existentialists relate to you. So it is all this. Again and again, we needn't go into this. This is to existentialist alienation is what is touching upon individual on one side, societal norms and expectations on other side, and you find an existentialist anti-hero in Marsault. So it is individual's search for meaning in an inherent meaningless world. And what is the solution? We suggested 3 solutions that he gave. And is he like Sisyphus? So out of this essay, he must have created this hero, I think. Out of the myth of Sisyphus, he created a modern hero of the times to whom people related very meaningfully. At that time when it was published, it was just an immense success. People read it. They could find meaning in absurdity. They could relate to Marsault. So a non-traditional hero he was, but still facing a hostile environment, and he is developed out of the concept of the myth of Sisyphus, I think. So he makes sometimes sense to us. And Stranger is about all these things. You can explore it from your own understanding. You can explore it, you can read it and think whether whatever he says is of any sense to us. In this digitalized so-called world, we have many selves, not only one self. I have a Facebook self, I have got an Instagram self, I have so many selves. And what is a self that is real? Isn't it absurd, or is it? So we don't like asking those questions because it brings in a lot of challenges. And that is not easy. To face that challenge is not something easy, because conformity is the easiest route. So we conform. Everybody is giving like. What if I don't give it? People will think that I'm jealous. So I won't give. So I'll give. So you come to one of those decisions. So those small decisions you take, from that to deeper ones, it makes perfect sense, because individually inside you know who you are. You have a face mask that is created for the society. But inside, I may have my own fears. I may have, it is an individual, I may have my own misgivings. I may have my own fears, dread, demonic, all that will be there. But I may not be speaking to you about that, because I'm a speaker here. I shouldn't be exposing my dreadful self to you at this moment. So at least if you don't ask, should we wind not in depth, but still. So Plague, if you have, how many have read Plague? Anyone who has read Plague? No one? So you should read it you should have read it when we were quarantined. When we were facing a kind of pandemic, it made perfect sense. Each and every line, so many people began to read it again and again, because it made sense. They could connect to this particular work. And Plague is not plague alone. It's not bubonic plague alone, because the Nazi invasion that was happening in France, he also speaks of that in another sense. Actually, it is a story of how this Algerian city of Oran is affected by plague, and when slowly plague sweeps into their life, people just believe that it's not a pandemic. Just like we believed that it is not pandemic. The authorities would hide the news from us and won't give us the real picture of what is happening. We were running for masks, we were running for sanitizers, we were running for, and luckily we were in 21st century with so many advancements in sciences that we needn't have dreaded it like so many others earlier. We could at least prevent it with the mask. It was not so earlier. So he had read in depth about these things happen. These things get repeated. These plagues can come in the form of war, in the form of terrorism. It can come as a material reality also. It can come into our life. So plague can be anything from war to terrorism to actually a pandemic that we have faced. So it's a story. And it also explores these existentialist themes, even though it is a fictional story about the city of Oran and the absurdity of life. And why absurdity of life? There is a doctor, Dr. Ryu, whose response is totally different from the dwellers, town dwellers. There is a priest. He comes and preaches and says that this is because of the sins that you have committed, we are encountering. So in biblical stories, you have versions of how God punishes a particular community for going against him. And he has such a response. People have diverse responses, and you can find the same response at the time of the pandemic that we encountered. Earlier it was shaking hands. When Corona was at the peak, how were people shaking hands? They were not shaking hands. You can see Emmanuel Macron coming, and he's just putting it with his, he was not shaking hands. He was doing so many diverse things. The whole norms changed. The responses changed. So at that time also, it was different. The social distancing became a norm. So all that normal became the new normal things emerged. The same things, the diversity that you can find. Some believe that they are immune to the disease, so they removed masks. You can find political leaders doing that. A diverse response. You just recollect what all we went through. We have almost forgotten that history that we encountered when our schools were closed, we were confined, new modes came into our life. So reading it is just reliving it. So plague is psychological, social and philosophical effect that pandemic can bring to your life. So this is just a summary of how it happened. Rats began to die in the streets. Then the authorities just cremated them, and they just gave a false impression that nothing was wrong. There is no pandemic. And Dr. Ryu, observing all this, he felt that slowly it is sweeping in to the human beings. They can die. And what is the way of preventing it? He was treating it with utmost caution along with his other attendants and having a scientific approach, just like we had. When at the wake of pandemic, some responded scientifically, some responded with care, with caution, and some in a very different, diverse manner. So how plague can still be a metaphor for so many irrational things that we do. So we have to test ourselves at the times of these crises. Otherwise it's easy. Otherwise, discussing philosophy is easy. Within the confines of your comfort zones, we can discuss anything. You are put into a concentration camp. Then how you find life? So you have such versions of people some have survived. In man's search for meaning, the author says, some were like pigs and some were like saints. Same reality. Some responded, some cursed their fate, ending up in a concentration camp, and they never survived. Some were cast and some were emerged like saints. All this suffering they faced. So you can have various diverse response to things, and that is still meaningful. More than outsider, this is a very positive sense. The response in these characters from a very objective sense, you can view in a different angle. You can view the pandemic, and it throws fresh insights into our own reality. So this character, Ryu, is a very symbolic person. He's very compassionate. He's a very delicate person who understands the scientific reasons, and he tirelessly treats the infected people, taking a huge risk and treating them. And there are many who act in a rebellious way. Some show solidarity. All these diverse characters which we have found in our own pandemic situation, all that you are able to, even still now, If you have lost memories of the pandemic, you can read this novel. So many all over the world have read it and found it meaningful. Even I could relate to each and every sentence of Father Ryu, how he found, some people said that this is an old disease, it won't affect us. It happened in 15th, 14th century. And he says that the dead man only knows. Death knows. Death is a reality coming to us. We always have a belief that it won't come to our family. It won't affect us. It is happening to someone else. The moment it comes to us, then we are shaken out of our comfort zones. We may even question God at that time. Why this is happening to me? Am I not religious enough? Am I not religious enough? So that those kinds of moments is where you are tested of your real, authentic self. So a reality that is confronted with. So all this comes when fear, denial, all this can be diverse responses to things, and suffering, death, meaninglessness of life, all that you can find in plague. And it raises some questions of the nature of suffering, the meaning of life, heroism and compassion. Whether you become a hero, when you are a compassionate person, how you become, what is that you are, is being tested when a dreadful disease is coming to us. It can be not only plague, not only it can be religious fanaticism that is coming to us. Maybe it can be a tsunami that has happened. It can be a flood. So that those were our realities. Even at the wake of that, how you respond to it. That is how you can relate to plague. So there is themes of isolation, fragility of human existence, and how you see life. What is the meaning of life? So again and again this comes when we are in our comfort zones, when you have no dread, when you are not questioned. You needn't face a question like an angst. You needn't go through that. But when it comes, when it shakes you out of all that comforts that you have, then you have to, even if you like or not, then you'll have to ask these questions. So this particular plague is a metaphor for so many things. It can be social oppression, it can be a religious ideology, or it can be a political ideology, that is, anything can take the form of plague. So war, terrorism, natural disaster, all this. So the plague will depend on our own individual experiences and perspectives. The same reality we have all gone through, and what it has taught us. That is, each one would have an individual perspective on that, individual response to things. So that makes the whole experience so diverse and different. It would have created a more genuine human being in you. It would have sometimes created a very dreadful, fearful person who was frightened of this disease. You must be, or it would have brought out the goodness in you. You wanted to do so many things for the society when the whole society was suffering. It would have. So that is how he treats plague in his in his works. So what is the relevance of this in modern times? Throughout the lecture we have been connecting it in one way or the other to this. So even amidst these digitally connected things, are you not alienated? Are you not crying? You have all these friends surrounding you, giving you so much of positive messages. Still you feel you are dejected. You are not one with them. There you can relate to these questions. So materialism that has gripped us, superficiality that taking new places, so deeper meaning, connection, genuine human relationships, these can be questions that still gives meaning to a life. So it is not, we are not trying to criticize all that is happening. It will go on its own way. Still there are dogs of England. There is a poem, Dogs of England still barks in Auden. There is still madness in Ireland. You can find mad people still. You find Russian madness in Ukraine still now. So you can find some. I wouldn't fear to speak out, but I tell myself to be inauthentic. I tell myself it is madness. When I may categorize, that may have political problems when we speak it out, but there is madness in the society, and how you face it, you're following it. So all these questions are still relevant. So even in absurdity, you can have meaning. So he was a spokesperson of his age, of the modern age. He spoke of isolation of man. He spoke of his own estrangement from the society. He spoke of evil and the reality of death. All these were themes that was relevant at that time, and even now you find it very meaningful if you ask very genuine questions like this. What is the meaning of my life? Don't go and seek meaning for other people's lives. Ask it every day, every morning when you rise up. You ask it. As a student, studying, giving meaning to my life, going to college. You can show that you are a student by waking up, going to college, sitting in a class, conforming to the norms of what teachers, writing down notes. All of this would give you meaning as a student. But is it that to show the society, to show your parents, to show that you are a genuine student? Those are some of the things, the conformities that we have. I may be doing the same things. I may be showing that I'm a teacher. I may be preaching things. I may be giving guidance, good and evil. All that will be dictated to my students. So am I doing it for the sake of impressing the society? I am that a very genuine teacher? That is a question that you can ask at any waking moment. Sometimes it may fail to give you an answer. So never bother about it, but still keep on asking. That would be something meaningful even in this digitally connected 21st century. So he would be like, he outlined, he was against defending truth, modernization, justice, all that can be relevant too. He rejected the dogmatic aspect of Christianity and Marxism. So we can also reject so many things. Not for forsaking, but to be genuine. We can, not to show sometimes. Sometimes we can, to lead. Am I a Christian? I always ask that question. And I always end up with the answer, I'm not. If somebody asks me to show his right cheek and he slaps, he won't get a chance to strike on the left because I would have lashed back. I would have. So we are just conforming, we are just showing the society, and when the showness is gone, there emerges the genuine, real human being that you are capable of becoming. A thinking human being, even at the dread of being away from the society, even at the dread of being alienated by the society, a very genuine question you will be asking. There I find meaning in Camu. There I find meaning in existentialist art. There I find meaning in absurdity. So this is what I need to tell you in our discussions. We may have diverse, different views on life. So this is what discussing for the sake of discussing Camu, and some of the things that I have pondered on, I have shared with you, and thus we conclude the lecture with a quote. It's a quote from one of my favorite authors. So mind has mountains, it has cliffs of fall, frightful, sheer, no man fathomed. It's very difficult. When you face it in mind, you feel that you are going to fall off the precipice. You ask such questions. And he says, hold them cheap. May you have never hung there. If you have never faced that, if you have never faced that existentialist angst, if you never faced those deeper questions, you have not led an authentic life. Is what the poet would say. That may not be our answer. So with this thought, I would like to conclude and thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.